So when you're ready.
The United States has a history of established systematic oppression and discrimination against minorities, specifically African Americans. Former civil rights activist Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once notably said in his letter from Birmingham jail that justice too long delayed is justice denied. The significance of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s statement concerning the attainment of equal rights for African Americans in the United States during the 1900s applies to modern-day issues plaguing African Americans like the racial wealth gap. The racial wealth gap refers to the disparities in wealth among African Americans and white individuals, as the wealth African Americans hold is significantly lower than their white counterparts. As you can see here in this study by the Urban Institute, the average family wealth held by whites is 7 times more than the average family wealth held by blacks in 2016. This prompts one to ask the question, how does the racial wealth gap lead to the disadvantage of African Americans in the United States? Through the evaluation of economic, health, and educational issues prominent amongst many individuals within the African American community, the effects of the racial wealth gap are apparent. African American students exemplify a group that is financially disadvantaged due to the lack of wealth available for transfer from their familiar counterparts. As family wealth plays a large role in the educational attainment and accumulation of wealth for college graduates. Due to the growing number of wealth disparities among individuals, black households find themselves less likely to make monetary investments into their child's education. According to a study conducted by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, white households were twice as likely to receive financial assistance for education from their parents compared to black households. Regardless of whether students receive little to no financial help from their families, most expect to finance some part of their education through loans or scholarships. However, inequality still exists with the number of loans African Americans students are forced to take out and how such debt transfers to their overall wealth accumulation. For example, while only 65% of white college students graduate in debt due to the accumulation of student loans, 85% of African American college students do. The accumulation of debt hinders the ability of African American graduates to accumulate wealth as they struggle to pay for loans, even with their increased economic opportunities due to the attainment of a college degree. Aside from economic disadvantages, African Americans also suffer from health disadvantages due to the racial wealth gap. An individual's socioeconomic status is directly correlated to their wealth among other factors such as income, education, and occupation. According to Dr. Brittany P. Taylor in a dissertation for Walden University, socioeconomic status contributes to the well-being of individuals as it affects the accessibility of healthy lifestyle choices and healthcare. Consequently, African Americans in the United States tend to suffer from health disparities as a result of their lower wealth attainment and socioeconomic status. According to Dr. Tyson H. Brown in a dissertation for the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, low wealth attainment and socioeconomic status decreases the availability of resources an individual has, which translates into poor lifestyle choices. The effects of the limited resource availability on health are witnessed in the increased rates of late diagnosis and chronic diseases suffered by African Americans. For example, when compared to white women, black women are more likely to have cervical cancer diagnosed at a later stage, resulting in higher rates of morbidity and mortality. Altogether, the health effects of lacking resources are evident through mortality disparities among whites and African Americans. According to Professor of Public Health David R. Williams for the University of Michigan, the death rate of African Americans is 1.6 times greater than that of their white counterparts. Ultimately, the effects of the racial wealth gap contributing to socioeconomic status have proven to have deadly consequences for African Americans. The effects of the racial wealth gap are also apparent in the educational outcomes and achievements of young African American children. According to psychologist Daniel T. Willingham for the Journal of American Educator, household wealth has a direct correlation with the development of IQ and school achievement in children. Due to the lack of physical wealth accumulation, factors stemming from deficient monetary and positive social investments in African American children have resulted in developmental and educational disparities. Children from wealthier families have access to sources of intellectual stimulation such as books and tutors, which provide academic support. Thus, the absence of mental encouragement has detrimental long-term consequences on brain development in children, which is expressed through cognitive performance. Moreover, stress levels associated with low wealth accumulation aid in the development of inferior cognitive skills that directly affect academic performance. For example, according to a study conducted by Oxford University for the Journal of International Neuropsychological Society, discrepancies have been found between overall literacy abilities among African Americans and white students, which limits their educational performance through continued schooling. Altogether, through the evaluation of factors affecting cognitive ability among children. The effects of the racial wealth gap on the educational outcomes of African American students is visible. However, despite evidence demonstrating the causation between a lack of wealth accumulation and economic health and educational disparities among the African American communities, individuals tend to argue for other factors which solely conceive such issues, such as racism. Racism may contribute or perpetuate problems African Americans face within the United States, but it is not the only factor involved, as solutions addressing the causes of the racial wealth gap have proven to overcome the problem. Organizations and programs like the Harlem Children's Zone and Perry Preschool Project have provided African American youth with opportunities necessary for success by equipping communities with projects aimed at implementing support for children through educational, social services, family support, health, and community building programs. In 2017 alone, the Harlem Children's Zone served over 25,000 students and parents through its programs, providing the intervention needed for students who fulfill academic potential and pursue higher education. However, the reach of such programs is restrained due to the limited amount of resources available for distribution among millions of African American youth across the country. The federal government can create organizations and programs like Harlem's Children's Zone and the Perry Preschool Project available for all children suffering from limited wealth resources across the country through the creation of legislation. Through legislative orders, the funding and implementation of such programs and organizations would fall under the authority of the executive departments like the Department of Education and the Department of Health and Human Services. However, limitations concerning the creation of reformative legislation exist. The issue of the racial wealth gap in the United States is not one many citizens concern themselves with due to their lack of relation to the issue. Moreover, the racial wealth gap is not a problem many individuals recognize or believe is worth addressing. Therefore, the reality of creating public policy that would intervene and redistribute opportunities for disadvantaged African Americans is slim. Nonetheless, the creation of legislation addressing the growing racial wealth gap in the United States is attainable if proper attention is brought upon the issue. By correctly informing citizens of the problems plaguing African American communities and what can be done to stop the continuous cycle of the racial wealth gap, the creation of legislation is possible, and the United States will once again be able to provide equal opportunities for all of its citizens. Thank you.
Okay. What information did you need before you began your research, and how did that information shape your research?
So, originally I planned to broaden the topic of the racial wealth gap to other minorities such as Hispanics, Latinos, and Asian Americans in the United States. And as I continued to find information about the racial wealth gap and who it affects, I found that African Americans tended to suffer more from it, and there was more information to support my arguments for it. Therefore, as I continued to research, I chose to focus on them, and that's the basis of what kind of information I needed in order to further my research.
Okay. So what advice would you have for other researchers who were considering your topic?
I would let them know that it's a very broad topic. So I would try to find something to focus on and not really go in blind. So try to find information before, like statistics talking about how it has grown over time and who it affects, whether it's African Americans, again, Asians, Latinos, whoever. And as you continue to research, you should focus on either specific lenses or perspectives that you could look into. For example, like I did the educational, health, and so lenses such as those in order to really provide an impact and gather effective research.
Okay, thank you.